Superman Returns was the first Superman film I was old enough to see at the cinema. I know that'll probably make some of you feel old. It was released 19 years after the disastrous Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and stars Brandon Routh as Superman. The reason for the long period between films was due to a number of factors. First and foremost, the terrible quality of the fourth film and its failure at the box office, which I've covered in a separate video. The studio, Cannon Films, also went bankrupt, and Christopher Reeve was also paralysed in a tragic accident, so a new Superman would have to be found. Several scripts and rewrites were done as the film entered production hell, which almost resulted in us getting a Nicolas Cage Superman film called Superman Lives. It wasn't until 2006 when Superman Returns finally released. By then, Christopher Reeve had sadly passed away, so after a 19-year wait, Superman was back on the big screen and the audience was primed to see Superman ready to fight crime, with the much improved effects of the day. It had 7-star Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor, and X-Men director Bryan Singer at the helm. And it was alright. I'm Firelink Frontier, and on this channel I discuss films, TV shows and video games. If you'd like to support the channel, then please consider subscribing and liking the video. On paper, you'd think Superman Returns would have been great. Don't get me wrong, it's not on the level of Superman 3 or 4, but it's also nothing special either. It had a proven superhero director, an A-list actor as its villain, and a massive budget of $223 million, with the costs going even higher if you consider all the 90s development costs. But what we're left with is a film that was fine. Superman Returns takes place 5 years after the events of Superman 2. I guess they wanted to forget the questionable Superman 3 and 4, which I've covered in their own separate videos. It follows Superman as he returns to Earth after a 5-year absence. He travelled to where an astronomer believed the location of Krypton once was, before its destruction. Lex Luthor returns, as the villain for the 4th time in 5 films, with the other film also starring a rich businessman villain in Superman 3. I appreciate that they went with a more serious direction with Lex Luthor in this film. I did like Gene Hackman's portrayal, but sometimes it goes into the campy territory. Not that Kevin Spacey's portrayal was immune to that either. Kevin Spacey said that the director, Bryan Singer, told him to play Lex Luthor as darker and more bitter compared to Gene Hackman, and not to use the earlier portrayal as an inspiration. Lex is released from prison and has married a rich widow to inherit her fortune. Meanwhile, on Superman's return, he explains that he failed to find any Kryptonian survivors. He resumes his job at the Daily Planet and finds that Lois has moved on from him and has a kid, who is 5 years old, conveniently the same length of time that Superman was away. Lois has also written an article entitled "Why the World Doesn't Need Superman." Clark has to deal with the fact that those he loved have moved on without him, and it seems the world has too. Brandon Routh's portrayal of Superman is okay. He looks a lot like Christopher Reeve, but he lacks his presence. Nothing really stands out, but he's not terrible either, which seems to be a running theme in this film. Lex Luthor travels to the Fortress of Solitude again. Superman really needs to get better security. He plans to use some crystals as part of his villainous plan of creating more land. Is this his motivation in the comics? Because in the films, Lex Luthor seems obsessed with real estate. Perhaps if any comic book experts are watching, they can let me know in the comments. Lex's experiment with the crystals results in a plane malfunctioning that is carrying a space shuttle, and of course, Lois is on board, and she's covering the story. She doesn't have much luck, does she? Here we see our first bit of action, as Superman stops the plane from crashing. This is probably the best moment in the film, as we see Superman returning to the screen after such a long absence. That's pretty much the highlight of the film. The rest of the plot revolves around Lex stealing kryptonite again, and creating the big island that he expects that people will want to live on. His plan doesn't really make sense to me, but whatever. We have Superman and Lois reconnecting after Superman left for 5 years, and the big twist that her 5-year-old son is Superman's. It ends with Lois writing another article entitled "Why the World Needs Superman." Superman reassures her that he's staying this time, and he does the iconic smile at the camera at the end, like Christopher Reeve did, which I thought was a nice touch at the end. That's another good thing about this film. It pays respect to Christopher Reeve's films that it's following. And we also have a return of the iconic John Williams theme, although there is a downside to this, as the film doesn't really tread much new ground. While I like Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor, He is back to his old tricks again for the 4th time, and is again trying to cash in on real estate, albeit in a different way this time. When you compare this to what would come 2 years later, with Heath Ledger's Joker, or even Scarecrow in Batman Begins from 2005, Lex Luthor in this film isn't really memorable. There are a ton of Superman villains, so I'm not sure why we keep having to go back to Lex Luthor. The effects are good, with the plane sequence a particular highlight. It was nice to see more up-to-date effects in Superman, having grown up with the first 4 films, which weren't too bad, but they do show their age. Despite this, the film does drag. It's only 2.5 hours, but it feels longer, and that's coming from someone whose favourite films are nearly all over 3 hours. There's a lack of action, probably again due to having a human villain. I'm sure Superman could kill him with one punch. Not that he would, but I don't think the fight would last very long. The film doesn't need to be all explosions and fight scenes, but in a Superman film, a little wouldn't hurt, especially as this film features a Superman that's well into his career. Also, the whole Lois storyline with her son wasn't very compelling. The twist seemed obvious from the start, and it just wasn't very interesting. Again, Brandon Routh is okay as Superman, but as I said, he doesn't have the presence that Christopher Reeve had. Also, Lex Luthor's plan seems ridiculous. He plans to create a new landmass with the Kryptonian crystals, which would kill billions of people, and then he expects people to live there. Why anyone would want to live there, I have no idea. His plan doesn't seem to make sense. Also, Superman loses his powers when he steps on the land as it's made of kryptonite, but then he's able to pick up the whole island at the end of the film and throw it off the earth. That sort of thing annoys me. When you establish that Superman has only one weakness, but then say if he charges up on the sun's energy, he can lift a whole island of kryptonite, it gives weight to the people who say Superman is overpowered. So overall, it was alright, and nothing special. It was nice to see a continuation of the Christopher Reeve Superman, with some callbacks to the original film, but it didn't really break any new ground. I'm Firelink Frontier, and thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.